Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Game of Thrones Season 6, Episode 4, Book of the Stranger. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Game of Thrones, so I have to give a spoiler warning for Game of Thrones up to Season 6, Episode 4. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. However, this video will not contain other kinds of spoilers, such as from the books or from production leaks, so it will be free of those kinds of spoilers. So overall, I thought this was a really powerful episode, not one of the best, as there were a few scenes which I'll get to shortly, which I almost fell asleep in, but a few other scenes that I absolutely loved, and I have been waiting a long time to see, and they did not disappoint at all. So overall, this episode makes me feel really good about Season 6, and I can't wait to see more. So let's get into the meat of the episode, starting with the wall. That begins with a really interesting scene with Jon and Ed having it out where Jon has completely lost faith and just wants to leave, whereas Ed is angry at him for leaving, saying that he was there at Hardhome. How could he just abandon them with the White Walker threat still on its way? But Jon counters with how could they expect him to stay after what happened to him there? I like how they squabble over the wording of the Night's Watch vows, as Jon says he has already given his life to the Watch, therefore his vows are complete, but Ed counters with the line that says, "for all nights to come." But ultimately, I don't think that the wording of the Night's Watch vows ultimately matter all that much. No one, especially not Ed, is going to try to execute Jon for leaving or try to stop him for leaving, for that matter, after what happened to him. However, I do think in storytelling terms the main purpose for having Jon Snow be killed and come back to life was to sever his ties to the Night's Watch so he could leave them, because nothing short of that would make that happen. And of course, his death and resurrection served other purposes, such as making Melisandre completely devoted to him, believing he's the prince that was promised, but I think the main one was so he could leave the Night's Watch. So in the next scene, we see Sansa, Brienne, and Podrick arriving at Castle Black, and this was an amazing scene. I was really worried that they might have Jon Snow leave before Sansa arrives and that they would just miss each other, as we saw them do twice with Bran and Jon already, but I think it's about time to see some Starks finally reunite, and hopefully they're just among the first. And I got to be completely honest here, when Sansa came through the gate and saw Jon and they slowly moved towards each other and then they hugged, well, I just can't lie, I was bawling my eyes out at this moment. It is a really touching moment, because really we've been waiting since season 1 to see some Starks reunite, and it was definitely worth it. And I like how in the next scene Sansa even brings up how they never should have left Winterfell in the first place, and of course it's easy to see why Sansa would feel that way after everything that's happened to her, but what's interesting is that Jon feels the same way, because with him, he left to join the Night's Watch because he thought he was an unwanted bastard that no one wanted him around, but think of how useful he could have been had he not left. Then again, he probably would have just died at the Red Wedding along with everyone else, but of course, it's natural for Jon to regret his decision. What's also interesting is this is actually the first time we've ever seen Jon and Sansa interact with each other in the entire series run. The only time they ever shared the screen together was in the first episode when King Robert arrives in Winterfell and the entire Stark family are standing in a line together, but he was just kind of hiding in the back, which makes what he says a bit ironic about how he always used to just sulk in the corner. But it's interesting that they do bring up the type of relationship they used to have, which was hinted at in the books, that Sansa didn't really care much for Jon because he was a bastard and she was all proper and demure. Jon was much closer to the other Stark children like Robb, Bran, even Rickon, but in particular Arya, whom he was closest to. But even though they were never that close, they share a common childhood experience and, of course, a connection through family. So I totally bought their connection here, and it was so great to see them connect and reminisce about the past. And I can't even begin to explain how much I loved this scene. But then Sansa tries to convince Jon to try to retake Winterfell with the wildlings, but Jon, of course, is very resistant. He's sort of lost faith in everything since his death, and I like how he goes on in this scene about how everything's taken a toll on him for having to kill wildlings, having to kill other Night's Watchmen, and men that he admired, and having to kill a young boy. I knew that his hanging of Olly took a toll on him, and I suspected it's a major part of why he wants nothing to do with the Night's Watch or anything else anymore. However, Jon did pledge to protect Sansa, saying that his father's ghost would come back and haunt him if he didn't, which was a nice touch. So next we get an interesting scene where Davos finally confronts Melisandre about Stannis. I suppose now that everything has calmed down, he can get back to old business. Melisandre says that she's pledged to Jon Snow now and will do whatever he says, which is quite interesting. So I wonder if she will take part in attacking the Boltons. And it's interesting, she's totally on board with Jon being Azor Ahai. And Davos' response is interesting, as he said, well, I thought that was Stannis, which has a double meaning of how could you abandon Stannis, and also you were wrong. If you're wrong about Stannis, what makes you so sure that you're not also wrong about Jon Snow? Next, Davos finally confronts her about Shireen, asking what happened to her, but before she could say, Brienne interrupts and tells them what she saw, and she saw Stannis defeated at the hands of the Bolton, and also that she knows who Davos and Melisandre are and still holds a grudge against them for killing Renly, and she particularly looks at Melisandre when she talks about how he was killed by black magic, and then just straight up says that Stannis admitted using black magic to kill Renly just before she executed him. So now Davos knows that she killed Stannis, the man was completely devoted to. However, I don't think he's going to hold it against her or try to kill her or anything like that, because he just said shortly before that's all in the past. So I think he's going to be more concerned about what happens going forward. So I think he's going to level with Brienne and have them, both sort of move beyond it. But that's just my thought on the matter, because you have to remember that Davos played a part in Renly's death because he smuggled Melisandre to where she gave birth to the smoke baby that killed him, and he would feel really guilty about that, as he never thought that should have happened. So I think that he's just going to let it go, make peace with Brienne, but that's just my guess. I also think Melisandre is going to continue to dodge Davos about Shireen, because I think that's something that Davos could not forgive, but I think the truth will come out eventually. It kind of has to. So then later we get a scene where Sansa, Jon, Ed, and Tormund Giantsbane and Brienne are eating dinner together, and Tormund is making sort of eyes at Brienne as he thinks that she's hot, which is quite a funny scene, but it makes perfect sense that Tormund would find Brienne attractive, because wildlings value strength and appreciate strong women, and he probably rarely sees a woman that strong. And plus, Tormund in particular, who has claimed to have sex with a bear, would find her hot. Plus, but Brienne, of course, was put off by Tormund's obvious advances and didn't seem interested in them. But I think a large part of that is because she's not used to this kind of behavior. She's not used to being lust after, so finds it a bit awkward. But then their nice little dinner is interrupted when someone delivers Jon Snow a letter with a pink seal of the Boltons on it. So some could say it's a pink letter, in which Ramsay threatens Jon Snow, demands the return of Sansa, and tells him that he has Rickon. So what's interesting is in the letter he says if he fails to meet his demands, he'll kill all the wildlings under his protection, and I think that's all the motivation that Tormund Giantsbane needs to fight with Jon Snow. However, he says he only has 2,000 men, whereas the Boltons have about 5,000. However, Sansa suggests that there are still northern families that are still loyal and will fight for them if he asks. Which is interesting that she said that they would fight for them if he asked, because I thought it would be more convincing coming from her, since she's a full Stark. and he's just a bastard. However, this has finally made Jon come around, and he agrees to try to combat the Boltons and try to retake Winterfell. But it seems to me the first step before an actual attack will be for them to amass allies, in which I think Sansa will be instrumental in doing so. So I just can't wait to see that. So moving on to the next location, let's talk about the Vale, where we see Lord Royce humoring young Robin as he shoots arrows badly. And Littlefinger finally returns to the Vale with the gift of a falcon to give to Robin, who is completely delighted with it. However, Lord Royce questions Littlefinger about how Sansa ended up with the Boltons, and Littlefinger tries to turn it around and blame him on it, and he doesn't take too kindly for that. However, since Littlefinger has done such a great job of winning Robin over, Robin immediately sides with Littlefinger, and all the Vale soldiers are of course loyal to Robin first and foremost, so he in fact spins it around where Littlefinger has to convince Robin to spare Lord Royce, and then Littlefinger brings up Sansa and gets Robin to decide to help Sansa, and it's obvious it's what Littlefinger wanted all along, and he had Robin so wrapped around his finger. So now it seems the forces of the Vale are going to get involved in the northern conflict, which would certainly help the Sansa's cause. That is, if Littlefinger can be trusted, which is always a very risky proposition. However, here it does seem like his true intentions is to help Sansa, but you can never tell with Littlefinger. Anyway, I love this scene. It was great to finally see Littlefinger again, and the way he manipulated this situation was so awesome. Classic Littlefinger. So then we head over to Meereen, where Tyrion is meeting with the masters of Yunkai, Volantis, and Astapor, and Missandei and Grey Worm are not very pleased about this, as they simply want to defeat the masters in battle, as they hold a lot of resentment towards the slavers. So we see them meeting with a representative of the Masters of Volantis, who is a man we haven't seen on the show before, and a representative of the Masters of Yunkai, who is the man we met with, who met with Daenerys in Season 3, and a representative of the Masters of Astapor, who is Yizan, the slaver who owned Jorah and Tyrion last season. So it seems he has risen to be a Master of Astapor over this short amount of time. A bit implausible, but obviously it's just a way for the show to keep around a familiar character, which they often do. So Tyrion tries to negotiate with them while Grey Worm and Missandei are openly hostile towards them, but Tyrion proposes that they give these other cities 7 years to phase out slavery, and that Meereen will give them financial incentives to do so, and then parts by giving them all prostitutes, which is a typical Tyrion maneuver. However, Grey Worm and Missandei are not at all pleased with this proposal, and I do like how Tyrion asked them to stop funding the Sons of the Harpy, and their response is to say, "Oh, we're not funding the Sons of the Harpy," which Tyrion replies by saying, "Well, that's fine, just stop funding them all the same," which I think is, again, classic Tyrion. Then Tyrion, Grey Worm, and Missandei meet with the representatives of the former slaves, who are not at all happy that Tyrion is negotiating with the slavers, and are outraged at the notion of making peace with them. So this scene illustrates what a volatile situation it is in Meereen at the moment, and how Tyrion has to deal with a lot of anger on both sides. What's interesting here is that Grey Worm and Missandei both vouch for Tyrion with the former slave representatives. However, they're not completely certain about it, and later confront Tyrion about his plan, and Tyrion's response is that he wishes he could instantly end slavery and war, but he can't do both at the same time, so he's trying to find a compromise, a way of avoiding war and eventually ending slavery. I dare say that if Daenerys were around, she would side with Grey Worm and Missandei and not agree with what Tyrion's doing, but that's because she's not very wise and often lets her emotions rule her. I really liked these scenes and thought it was a great start to seeing Tyrion trying to defuse the situation in Meereen. However, I hope he starts to get a bit more clever than this, and I have a feeling that the slavers will betray him and things won't work out the way he wants, but we'll see. Also, I want to mention this thing Tyrion said about how a wise man once said, "You make peace with your enemies, not your friends." I'm not quite sure who he's quoting. The only time I remember that being said is by Littlefinger, who said this to Ned Stark when he tries to convince Ned to make peace with Cersei. But Tyrion was there to hear that, so I'm not sure if there's another instance of someone else saying that that I'm forgetting, or if we're meant to believe Littlefinger said this another time off screen that Tyrion heard. I don't know. So now let's go to King's Landing. Earlier I talked about scenes that I nearly fell asleep in, and I was referring to these scenes, particularly the one with Margaery and the High Sparrow where he tells her a story of how he became devoted. I think the only point of this scene is to drive home the fact that the High Sparrow doesn't have an ulterior motive and is truly devoted to the faith, which I already knew. However, after this, they let Margaery see Loras, and Margaery still has this attitude of never giving in to them, and she suspects they only let her see him so she could convince Loras to give in to them, but I think it's actually the other way around. They did it so Loras could convince her to give in to them, as Loras is truly broken. I suspect that they might be torturing him, or perhaps it's just being kept captive for so long, as Loras is a man of privilege that is not used to this sort of treatment. And I think it worked, as next we hear Margaery's plans to confess and do a walk of atonement, similar to what Cersei did. So then we get another scene where Cersei goes to talk to Tommen, only to find him with Maester Pycelle, who's babbling endlessly to him, and Cersei just tells him to go away, but Pycelle actually stands up to her for once, and I guess he's emboldened by her weakened position, but Tommen dismisses him to stop their bickering. And it was actually kind of funny the way Pycelle so slowly left the room, and it took forever, especially knowing that this sickly old man act is just an act. However, Cersei finds out from Tommen that he's been talking to the High Sparrow regularly and tries to dissuade him from trusting him, but she does learn a few things from him, such as Margaery planning to confess. So she goes to Kevan and Olenna with Jaime, and again they begin by being dismissive of them, but Jaime brings up again that they should work together, and this time he brings up what they know about Margaery. So Jaime suggests that Tyrell bring troops in to retrieve Margaery by force, and when Kevan suggests that the king ordered him to take no action against the High Sparrow, Jaime countered with that he should take no action at all and let the Tyrells get Margaery back by force, and Lady Olenna was completely on board with this plan, and so Kevan agreed as well. So the big question here is Cersei being sincere in wanting to help Margaery? I mean, obviously she doesn't want to help Margaery, but is she putting her hatred of her aside in order to attack the bigger issue of getting back at the High Sparrow? Has Jaime even mentioned that the best outcome would be for the High Sparrow to die in the altercation? And I think that's something Cersei wants very badly and is very willing to put her hatred for the Tyrells aside for the moment in order to accomplish this, but that's just me. So then we go to the Iron Islands, where Theon borrows Littlefinger's magic transporter to suddenly appear back in the Iron Islands from in the middle of the north in just 2 episodes. Anyway, Yara suspects Theon has ulterior motives for returning just before the King's Moot and thinks that he wants the Salt Throne for himself, and at first doesn't believe him when he keeps trying to tell her that he's not interested, but eventually believes him when he says that he wants to help her take the Salt Throne, and I think she realizes that he is a completely broken man and that he could help her gain the Salt Throne, so I think that they will trust each other from now on. Other than that, a very short scene without much to say about. So then we go to Winterfell, where Ramsay meets Osha after having bathed her and asks why he should keep her alive, and she tries to seduce him, and it's very obvious that she is underestimating Ramsay, as she was used to dealing with idiots like Theon. So I don't believe anything she says in this scene about how she was just helping the Starks just for the hell of it and feels that they owe her money. It's obvious she was just lying. And of course Ramsay brings up Theon and how he told him about what she did to help the Stark boys escape and how she did it by trying to seduce Theon. And that's when she goes for the knife, but Ramsay is quicker, stabs her in the neck, killing her. So I was really disappointed in this scene, as it seems like such a giant waste to bring back Osha after 3 seasons only to kill her off in the very second scene that she appears in. The first one, she didn't even have any lines. Seems like such a waste. But I suppose it's better than killing her off screen. Either way, she was a cool character, and it seems kind of a dickish move to have her disappear for 3 years only to kill her off as soon as she was reintroduced. On the other hand, many like myself were clinging to this hope that she would help Rickon escape, and this scene dashes those hopes, so it looks like Rickon's in for the long haul. And it seems like the whole scene was Ramsay setting her up to be killed, so yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of it. So finally, let's get to Vaes Dothrak, which begins with Jorah and Daario approaching the city, where Daario is further, goading Jorah about he'll never have Daenerys, which was, as I said last time, I'm pretty over this whole storyline as it's gone on for far too long, so I'm not really interested in this. So as they approach the city, Jorah convinces Daario to leave their weapons behind, and as it would be too dangerous to bring them in a city where weapons are forbidden. But Daario sees Jorah's grayscale, so finally someone else discovers that Jorah's infected, so I wonder where this will lead. Surely Daario is going to tell Daenerys, but we'll see. So next we see Jorah and Daario sneaking in the city and being discovered by 2 Dothraki that they have to kill. It seems like this scene was just thrown in there to have some action or raise the tension or whatever. And of course we get some humor when Daario smashes the dead body with a rock to hide the fact that he was stabbed. It was interesting that Jorah lost his fight after winning all those fights in the fighting pits. Is this meant to show how badass the Dothraki are, or that Jorah is losing his edge because of grayscale? Maybe both, I don't know. So then we see Daenerys hanging out with the Dosh Khaleen that are kind of, like her, and hope that she gets to join them. She meets a woman who was a Lazarene, which is the same sort of village people that the witch Mary Masdor was in season 1 that she belonged to. Anyway, this Khaleesi was taken at a very young age by Khal, who abused her, so Daenerys sort of likes her and starts to form a bond with her. So as they go out to take a piss, Daario and Jorah snatch her up, and Daenerys orders him not to kill her, and Daenerys says that they will never escape Vaes Dothrak alive, and when Jorah says that they need to at least try, she insists that they can do more than that. So next we see all the Khals gathered at the temple of the Dosh Khaleen deciding what to do with Daenerys. However, at first they're talking about the dead body that they discovered that's smashed by a rock, and ultimately they don't really care about it and just dismiss it. So again, it's kind of a waste of time. Anyway, then they bring Daenerys in and debate what to do with her. Some people want to sell her to Yunkai, who's offering lots of horses for her, while the main Khal wants her to join the Dosh Khaleen. However, Daenerys interrupts them to tell them that they're all small men, not worthy to rule the Dothraki, and that she will rule the Dothraki. And of course, they just laugh at her, and then they tell her that they're all going to rape her and then give her to their horses, and laughs that she could ever think that they would serve her, and she responds by saying that they won't serve her, they will die. And then she proceeds to burn the temple down, and apparently Jorah and Daario barred the doors so that no one can escape. So they all burn while she stands there smiling at them as they burn. And outside, everyone's gathered to watch this temple burn. When Daenerys walks out of the fire completely unburnt, completely unhurt, and everyone bows to her. So, if you didn't catch it in the previous episode, they mentioned that all of the Dothraki Khalasars were gathered there at the moment. So I would imagine those were all of the major Khals that died in the fire. So she essentially killed their entire leadership. And so I think the assumption here is that she takes leadership of all of the Dothraki. Not just one Khalasar, not just a couple, all of them. Now, this was a pretty badass Daenerys scene. However, I don't think it was as great or earth-shattering as, say, like the Birth of the Dragon scene or when she sacked Astapor, which is what I think they were going for, but still a great scene. And I liked how they subverted expectations, as I was just talking about earlier, how everyone was expecting that Drogon would just show up and save her, and that everyone would be impressed with Drogon, and that's how she'd win over the Dothraki. However, I think, it's interesting that she actually impressed them and saved herself without Drogon. She did it all on her own. However, I think they will only be more impressed when Drogon does show up, and that she basically will control all of the Dothraki. Now, there also might be some debate over what this means that Daenerys survived the fire, as many people like to point out that George R.R. Martin has stated that Targaryens are not immune to fire, and the instance where Daenerys survived the fire in Season 1 was unique, a one-time thing because there was blood magic involved. So this scene might spark some debates on both sides, but where I stand is, Targaryens definitely are not immune to fire, as there are many examples of them dying by fire. So it's not just any old Targaryen, but Daenerys in particular, because she's special. I believe her to be Azor Ahai, one of the special mystical figures, choose your prophecy, whatever. She's special. That's the main takeaway. And it doesn't mean that even she is fireproof all the time, but I do believe her to be sort of charmed in a way by the first experience, where when she wants to, she can survive a fire. And plus, this did take place in a temple, so perhaps magic was involved. Either way, I'm not sweating it. I don't believe the scene changes anything in that particular debate, and I still feel the same way I did about it before. Or maybe she is immune to fire in the show, but not the books. Either way, I really don't care. So, my rating for the Book of Stranger out of 10 is a 9 excellent. This was an amazing episode where I loved the Jon Snow Sansa scene so much. It was like geek heaven for me, and the Daenerys storyline was really satisfying, had a great ending to it, and it was great to finally see Tyrion do his thing in Meereen. But the Winterfell, King's Landing, and Iron Island storylines were the ones that kind of held this episode back from getting a 10 for me. But the rest was absolutely outstanding. I'm now thinking this could end up being the best season ever, but we'll see. So that's it for my review of the Book of Stranger. Be sure to check back here every week as I continue to review episodes of Season 6 of Game of Thrones. Also, be sure to check out my discussion with Atkin Tomko, which will be over on his channel Monday night, 7 p.m. Pacific West Coast time in the U.S., which will be 2 p.m. on Tuesday for me here in New Zealand. And there'll be a link in the description below where you can check that out. Also, be sure to check out my channel for many more Game of Thrones videos, as well as videos on other shows like Star Trek, Fear the Walking Dead, Orphan Black, and more. And be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. Thanks a lot for watching.